Spanning the globe, it's World Affairs Roundup.
The Institute of World Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee presents World Affairs Roundup, a monthly edition of International Focus providing opinion and analysis of global events, with John Katzka, a retired member of the U.S. Foreign Service, Ann Hamilton, political scientist at UW-Whitewater who also served in the U.S. Foreign Service, and Robert Kraig, executive director of Citizen Action of Wisconsin and author of articles and books on American foreign policy. Support provided by Milwaukee Public Television and the UWM Center for International Education. Now, here's your moderator, Doug Savage.
Welcome to International Focus and another edition of our World Affairs Roundup. Our full complement of Roundup regulars have reunited and are here to take a look at Road to Crimea. Fighting flared this week in eastern Ukraine, prompting speculation about Russia's intentions. Is Putin trying to redraw the map once again, or is this a sideshow in a larger contest? Austere no more. Victory by the anti-austerity Syriza party in last week's Greek election has put the country on a collision course with its European creditors. Can the new government stay true to their election platform while staying in the Eurozone? Kingdom come. Like it or not, Saudi Arabia's new king assumes the throne as forces in the region and beyond may be quickening the often glacial pace of change in his kingdom. As the Middle East's old political order unravels, how is Saudi Arabia's role evolving, and what might it mean for relations with Washington? Counting on good luck. 2 weeks before Election Day, a spike in atrocities committed by Nigeria's Boko Haram terrorist group has left incumbent President Goodluck Jonathan scrambling to look in command. Angry citizens have pelted his convoy with stones, and guards have been posted to prevent his image on campaign posters from being defaced. Why has his government proved unable to address the Boko Haram threat? And will this failure determine the election result in Africa's most populous nation? Well, welcome back, everyone, and good to see you back.
Thank you.
John, maybe we can start with Ukraine. There's been kind of an uptick in the action in the last few days. Tell us what the situation on the ground is.
Well, first of all, the peace talks that were supposed to resume in Minsk have been canceled. There is some shelling that's occurring. There's apparently troop movements on both sides that are occurring. There was a bombing in a small little city halfway between Russia and Crimea that was bombed. The question now becomes, what does this mean in a larger sense? Where, if I put myself into Putin's position right now, his economy is in trouble, but it's only going to get worse. Oil prices are dropping. The value of the ruble has dropped significantly. His infrastructure is in trouble. So if he were to do anything, this is the time he would want to do it. And then you come up with the issue of Crimea. Is he likely to give Crimea back to Ukraine? Probably not. This is something that having recaptured, as they would say, Crimea, they would want to keep it. Now, how do you maintain a relationship with Crimea without a land bridge? So the next thing that would come into mind is if my economy is as good as it's going to be for a while, and my troop strength is better than the opposition, this might be the time you wanted to move. So if you took to Crimea and created a land bridge between that, then there's the next question, is Transnistria in Moldova. If you're moving in that direction, it's not quite as high a priority for Russia, but if you're moving across the southern flank there, why would you want to go all the way across the Black Sea, the coast of the Black Sea, and make a connection with the Transnistria and the Russian-supported breakaway republic there? So all of these questions are coming up, and we don't seem to be having any grand strategy on this so far. And I'll leave it for my colleagues to fill in those spaces.
Well, Ann, what do you think? Could it also be just inevitably there's going to have to be some sort of accommodation, and you'd like to go into those negotiations if you're Mr. Putin with the strongest hand you can?
Well, I think that part of what's happening right now is, given the very poor economic situation that Russia is in, I think that we have somewhat of a wag the dog scenario, referring to the film, where to divert attention from what's going on at home. I mean, obviously this started when oil prices were a lot higher and under a different set of circumstances, but right now it seems like the Russian-backed separatists, and there are claims that there are at least 9,000 Russian soldiers there, appear to be winning militarily on a variety of fronts, including in the south, and they've retaken the airport in Donetsk, and so they're making territorial gains, and they're also starting to present the crisis in terms of now it's an existential fight. They're referring to the Foreign Legion that's in there of NATO troops. They're showing photos of, just as they earlier on in the crisis, they showed Russian soldiers, people who appeared to be Russian soldiers in the news. Now they've got people with American accents that they're showing on TV. So they're turning this into a fight between Russia and the United States, which is quite different in terms of its overall presentation to the Russian people. And so I think that he wants to keep it going at this point, and I think he wants to keep it going. It's tricky though, because if it goes too far over the edge, then things could really blow up in his face. But because there have been references to the fact that he wants to keep the situation frozen, keep it in a situation where Ukraine is not in a position to actually apply for NATO membership or EU membership formally, because it's just bogged down in the civil war for many years. I don't know if he's going to be able to do that.
Well, Robert, what about this connection with his political situation at home? I mean, if as Anne suggests, at least part of the conflict is being fueled as a diversion, what happens when things stop going well? I mean, do you have to perpetually then keep it up and keep winning to have it play that role back home?
This is one of those classic questions in foreign policy analysis where you're trying to analyze one actor and their motives and their perception of the world. And so Anne gave more of the status quo kind of view, that he's trying to maintain a crisis in Ukraine so it can't join NATO, keep it going and festering, and also a little bit of wag the dog. John suggested that at least what possibility is that it could go further. It could try to create a bridge to Crimea, maybe even beyond that, John was suggesting. And we don't know for sure. We know that the Russian economy is going to lose GDP this year, not just stagnate, but lose GDP. And we know that this is popular in Russia, and that Russian pride has been wounded over the last 20 years, and that this appeals to growing Russian nationalism. And I think Anne's right, calling them the NATO Legion, trying to suggest there are people with American accents in there, which is kind of silly. Maybe they're a couple, right? And they found them or planted them there. But it's hard to know whether this is, and Anne's right, you might not be able to keep it as a status quo situation. It might spin out of control, even if Putin doesn't want it to spin out of control, because he needs it to keep going at some level, and may follow it where he wants it to go. The problem we have is that the United States and NATO have been far too willing to kind of rub Russia's nose in it the last couple decades, and we really need to create some sort of space for him to save face, to have seemed to have won, and then to unwind this a bit, if at all possible.
But that's not likely to happen with the presidential elections coming up, and the Republicans in charge of the Congress. The hawks are in the ascendancy there, and so I just hear a lot of rhetoric without a lot of thinking about costs and consequences. Mm-hmm. And if Russia were to go into to take that corridor between Russia and Crimea, what were we going to do about it? Are we going to put troops on the ground? We're not willing to do that in Syria. Are we going to do that in Ukraine?
And against a nuclear power.
And against a nuclear,
right?
Who has all the resources right there at hand?
Well, what about the Russian side of that? Is there an appetite, do you think, and among the average Russian for that? I mean, there was some talk earlier that military intervention directly and explicitly probably was not in the cards, but could Putin sell that? Could he say, Mother Russia is being threatened, and this existential argument, and so the troops are going in?
Well, Robert put it, the Russians are still bruised over the way in which we handled the post-Cold War period. And so I would say that he has a very strong position within Russia generally. I mean, there are pockets, especially in Moscow and in St. Petersburg, that are going to probably protest this, and we can get them, they'll find American correspondents over there to be able to get their message across. But in the whole, the people will support Putin on this one.
Well, it's a dangerous situation to keep an eye on. Well, let's move still somewhat in the region to the Greek election. So, and just for people who may not know, and I don't know who they would be, what is Syriza's platform in this election? This is the ascendant party who actually won. And so what is the conundrum for them? How do they deliver on what they promised?
Well, they ran on an anti-austerity program, an anti-German program, in the sense that Germany is the one that required the austerity, along with other international organizations, required the austerity program that the Greeks have been undergoing. And they also are talking about delivering, making life better for people at home. So not only wanting to restructure the debt that they have, because the debt is crushing.
Or in fact, have some of it forgiven.
Yes, have some of it forgiven, ideally, and also get rid of austerity at home. So they have to negotiate with the Europeans, though. So the future of the European Union, in short, is at stake. Not only the euro, but the European Union.
And if you're the powers that be trying to keep the eurozone together, what is the argument on their side? I mean, we've heard Mademoiselle Lagarde from the IMF saying a debt's a debt and shut up and pay up, basically. So how much flexibility is there on that side?
Well, it's a very interesting situation, and the whole evolution of not just the Eurozone, but the European Union in general and the new Europe. And quite frankly, you had Germany and the other northern European powers coalescing, especially around the austerity and around having the allegedly lacquered Southerners who don't do the right thing pay their debt, right? But it led to 26% unemployment, so it's higher than unemployment was in the United States in the Great Depression and getting worse, with no prospect for it getting any better. And so and if you have any kind of functioning democracy, it was obviously predictable this would ultimately lead to a Greek government that was against the whole austerity regime and would see this as an attack on Greek sovereignty. Now, they have a fair amount of leverage. It's a question of whether the new leadership is going to be heedless or whether it's going to use its leverage to get a much better deal for Greece. And we don't know that. We're again at the point of trying to judge what actors will do. But it's very interesting. There's a whole analysis that Germany's motive has been to keep being able to use the rest of Europe as a place to export. That the German economy is highly dependent on exports. And so it's not this even-handed by this analysis where everyone plays by the same rules and lives up to their debts. It's actually an attempt to keep supporting a much more society in Germany at the cost of the rest of the EU, especially in Southern Europe. And that's the case that the Greeks will make. But there's a lot of other both leftist and rightist parties around Europe that also find that an appealing message and are sick of Angela Merkel and the alleged elite bureaucrats in the EU running their countries and deciding what their standards will be and what the quality of life will be.
Well, there's an aspect to this around the prospect of Grexit, of Greece leaving. And when it looked more likely several years ago, much of the exposure to Greek debt was in private hands. Some of the basically banking elite, much of that debt has now been transferred to public hands. So if you buy the theory that the bankers are the ones calling the shots, might they be more inclined to let Greece go since they wouldn't take the haircut this time around?
Well, that's a good point. You also should note that I think there is a UWM connection to the new finance minister.
There is a former guest on this very stage.
Well, he just stonewalled the EU financial representative, saying that he'll only discuss the Greek situation with European leaders, and only if they relieve Greek of half of their debt. So this is also an escalation. There's another thing that happened right after Tsipras was elected. His first public act was to pay homage to 400 Greeks that were killed by the Nazis during World War II. And one of his campaign planks was that Germans should be responsible for reparations, and that forgiving the debt would be part of that.
Well, another one to watch. It's hard to see how they bracket and split in that negotiation, but we'll stay tuned. First, we'll take a short break, then we'll be back.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to our World Affairs Roundup with John Katzka and Hamilton and Robert Kraig. Well, now let's move to another part of the world. Saudi Arabia just installed a new monarch. Is it more of the same? What do we know? First of all, talk a little bit about that process. Anybody who wants to jump in. How do we get from one king to the next?
Well, it's been problematic because it's a dynasty, and they have lots of children by multiple mothers, and therefore there are lots and lots of half-brothers in each generation. And so this has always been one of the weaknesses of the dynasty. And so in this case, not only did they select the successor, really the last one from this generation, but that pre-selected the next successor for the next generation to try to create a certain level of stability. So it looks like the status quo in Saudi Arabia for the most part, but all of the different foreign leaders, including President Obama and the First Lady, going there and genuflecting before the Saudi dynasty has led to more questions about our connection to them, the very harsh kind of Islam that they promote and their connections. There's going to be a report coming out, I think, next week that is going to show connections between Saudi Arabia and 911, which will probably cause a lot of nationalist reaction in the United States. And so it really is, as we pursue nuclear negotiations with Iran, a real question about whether we should be tilted so heavily to Saudi Arabia or not, and whether that's in our interest or in the interest of stability in the Middle East.
Well, and I think that's one of the key questions. I mean, there's really a contest for who's going to be the hegemon in the region. Is it Iran or is it Saudi Arabia? And some people are arguing it may be time to pivot, if you will, more towards Iran. Well, John, you're shaking your head. You don't buy it.
I don't think you can make a choice between the two. What I think you have to try to do is to walk a careful road between the two and look after our interest in the process.
And what are our interests vis-a-vis each one?
Well, we have an interest in making sure that oil is available to the world, whether we are energy self-sufficient or not. That's in our interest because we want to see a expanding trading platform for us to grow as well. I think that's the major point there.
And also to ensure, in some way, to ensure stability in the region, however we might do that, particularly given the threats of various terrorist groups in the region. So, I mean, because we obviously can't achieve the first goal if the region is on fire. Yeah.
So, from Riyadh's perspective, what are the problematic aspects of U.S. policy in the region? What don't they like that we're doing?
Are negotiating with Iran.
Right. They're concerned about a tilt towards Iran.
This is the Sunni-Shia split in the Arab world, in the Islamic world.
And they're also highly critical of our lack of action with respect to Syria, because they would like to see Assad go.
And I think they're threatened by the so-called ISIS or Islamic State, which of course is very much, it's talked literally about sacking the Saudi regime. And so they have a lot more internal problems. The divisions aren't just U.S. Saudi Arabia, U.S. Iran, and Israel. Sure. The divisions with Sunni Shia and Persian Arab divisions are extremely profound and we seem to be heading towards more instability since the obviously peace in the Israeli-Palestinian front is very far away as well.
make a point to something Robert brought up in terms of the succession. There was a great deal of concern of Saudi watchers about how they were going to make the jump to the next generation. And they did it rather calmly and logically. And this is going to be a major relief in this respect. Now, the king has already come out with 30 decrees moving a number of people, mostly the offspring of the former king, out of positions and moving offspring of his own into positions. But the critical point there, I think, is that the oil and foreign affairs and finance ministries are staying in the same hands.
Well, we've got to jump to our last port of call here, but just very quickly, what is the domestic energy aspect of all of this? I mean, part of the reason that we're having such a good time filling up with, $1.85 a gallon gas at the pump is because of a certain competition that, John, you touched on a little bit, right?
North Dakota just announced that they are seeing a major cutback in their revenues, in their tax revenues, because of the fact that the exploration and the drilling for shale oil is falling off.
And where there's disagreement is whether Saudi Arabia actually has the controlled discipline to actually have driven down prices by flooding the market the way, say, China would have flooded markets with cheap goods at a loss, or whether this is simply, the politics of just kind of spinning out of control. But regardless, it's making it much more expensive to go after the harder to reach fossil fuels. Now, those concerned about global warming are not too unhappy about that, because those fuels are much more damaging, quite frankly, than traditional fossil fuels.
Well, and also Saudi Arabia had as its targets in terms of, and I do think that the people I'm following say that Saudis are the ones who are driving this process, and the targets are twofold. One, it's Iran and Syria, and secondly, it is Canada and United States shale.
Well, as promised, we have one more stop to make, and that's Nigeria. So, and maybe you could tell us, what is the situation right now with Boko Haram and the north and south?
Boko Haram is an Islamist group that is killing literally thousands of people. The name means Western education is sin or something like that. And they've committed a lot of notorious horrific acts in the last couple of years, including the kidnapping of 276 girls and the killing of a lot of boys at schools. And so it's basically an insurgency in the northeast of the country that's now spilling over into Cameroon and Chad.
And there's an ethnic dimension to north and south?
Yes, because the north is majority Muslim and the south is Christian and other groups in Nigeria. And the government of Goodluck Jonathan, who's from the South, a Christian from the South, has been unable to contain this and at times seemed callously indifferent to what has been going on, in the sense that took him 2 weeks to respond to the kidnapping of the girls in Chibok last year. He's been reported to have photos of him dancing 2 days after the latest attacks, in which at least 2,000 were killed at his foster daughter's wedding. So it's a situation that's spinning out of control, and there are elections coming up in 2 weeks for the presidency. And his primary competition is a former military ruler who ruled the country for 18 months back in the 1990s, I think, 1980s, 1990s.
And in fact, his opponent in the previous election as well. So, and Robert, remind us of what the outcome of that was, both electorally and on the street, of these last elections.
Well, obviously, Goodluck Jonathan won an actual election in his own right, but there was mass violence. There were 800 people killed. International monitors think it was a relatively fair election by the standards of undeveloped democracies, but that's not been the way the other side's seen it. But there's been a consolidation of the opposition parties. So Goodluck Jonathan's opponent is considered much more formidable because those parties are all together now. it is a very strange situation where he's campaigning. A lot of people think he's the favorite. He's campaigning. He's being pelted by stones, and there are soldiers protecting his image on signs, yet he's considered the favorite. So this is a different standard of democracy than we're used to in the United States, but it's a government, because of the level of corruption and the level of cronyism in the military, that's unable to respond to a major terrorist threat. If there was a terrorist entity in part of the United States going town to town and kidnapping people and murdering people, there would be a much more forceful response. So it's hard to understand how inadequate, incompetent, corrupt, unfocused this government is. And it's interesting even in terms of the expectations. I mean, you put it on your moniker, this slogan with Good Luck Jonathan with his fedora hat on saying, "I vow to do more." I mean, doesn't that sound like an incredibly defensive kind of slogan? It's not about great new things. He's going to do more. Re-elect me.
There's a curious,
bad stuff.
a curious element to this. The Nigerian ambassador to the United States has criticized the United States for not providing enough assistance. Well, right after the kidnapping, we sent in a unit to be able to help them in terms of this, and the president added them to a security governance initiative that we have. The trouble is that we're limited in what we can do to assist them because of their human rights violations.
Well, we'll have to cut you off there. Thank you. Good to see you all back. Viewers, we'll see you again next time.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,